Hi everyone, Adam Bandt here, leader of the Greens, coming to you from Melbourne at probably certainly one of the most unprecedented times that we've been facing, and one of the most anxious for many people who are wondering how we're going to deal with this health crisis that's hitting us and coming at us like a freight train, and that potentially is going to affect many people who are close to us. And I think the first thing that I want to say is that at times like this, we've got to remember we're all in this together, yeah? This is a moment where we find out what truly matters in society and how much we'll reach out to each other and those around us and look after those who might not be reading all the warnings, might not have the capacity to read all the science, who are old, who are poor, who are vulnerable. It's going to be our responsibility during all of this to make sure that we all come through this together. And on that front, can I just say, firstly, I think probably on behalf of a lot of people in Australia, thank you to everyone, all our health workers, all our community workers, everyone who's putting themselves on the front line, literally on the front line to deal with this crisis that we're still learning about as we go. I mean, it's one thing to confront a crisis that you know everything about. It's another thing to be hit with a virus and a disease that we're still trying to work out how it operates, how it works, how it affects people, how it spreads. All of this is stuff that we're learning as we're trying to develop the response to it. So for everyone who's working on it, trying to keep us safe, trying to find solutions, working ultimately on a vaccine, thank you for everything that you're doing. And we are going to be going back to Parliament sometime on Monday. We're going to be going back for probably only a couple of days for what will be, I think, a very unique session where we're dealing only with legislation to deal with the impacts of the coronavirus, and especially the economic and the social impacts, and working out what we can do in a session that might be the last for several weeks. We might not even have a further budget session after this, who knows. This will be our last chance to put in place things that are going to be needed to make sure that everyone in this society is looked after, and that we come out not only with the economy healthy, but first and foremost, making sure that as many of us are as healthy as possible. And to that end, I've got to say that the Greens are quite worried that the government is leaving too many people behind. And that's probably not a shock given the approach of this government, that when they think about who needs help, they tend to think about big corporations and big business. And yes, it is absolutely right that at this time we've got to make sure the country doesn't fall into recession and that the economy keeps ticking over. But first and foremost, this is a crisis that is going to hit lots of people and could take a lot of people's lives. And so we need to make sure that no one is left behind. And there is a growing proportion of the society that the government is not talking about. People who are living on Newstart or youth allowance are living below the poverty line. Now, when you're living below the poverty line, they're not the people who are raiding the shopping centres, stocking up on toilet paper or other bare essentials, because they're just living hand to mouth and going without the essentials in the first place. And so if we want to make sure that there's money flowing into businesses, and we want to make sure that money gets spent locally on things like food that will in turn be grown by our farmers who are also suffering through a drought still, then we have to make sure that we lift Newstart and Youth Allowance. We have to lift people out of poverty. We can't have millions of Australians living in poverty as we're facing one of the biggest health crises that we've ever faced. And not only that, the unemployment is predicted to rise as a result of this crisis. And if unemployment rises, more people are going to find out how difficult it is to live below the poverty line on Newstart or Youth Allowance. And those people still have mortgages to pay, still have rent to pay. So one of the best things that we can do to support people throughout the crisis is lift Newstart and Youth Allowance by at least $95 a week, because there's going to be a lot more people potentially who are going to rely on it if things play out as they look like playing out at the moment. So we need to look after the people who are doing it the toughest. We also need to make sure that we don't see people being evicted from their houses during this time. Now, if you rent, then chances are you're in a job where you might be in a job where you're casual, where you're reliant on day-to-day work, and you might be working in the hospitality industry or the arts industry, and those sectors are being smashed at the moment, and people are losing their shifts. And if you're a gig worker, then you probably haven't got a lot of savings to rely on. If you're a casual worker, ditto. Now, all of those people have still got rent to pay. In some instances, they've still got mortgages to pay as well. And you've still got food to buy. And now you're being told you might need to have to stock up for a couple of weeks as well. So the government needs to be making sure that no one gets kicked out of their house during this period. In fact, this is the time for us to be building more public housing units, because taking an approach to stimulating the economy by having more construction jobs and getting more apprentices into work, because we're going to need more places. But we've got to make sure that there's a pause and a freeze on kicking people out of their houses over the next little while. We also need to think about those sectors of the economy that the government is forgetting. A lot of people are talking about tourism, and rightly so, because tourism is getting the double whammy from the climate crisis and now the corona crisis as well. But what about people who work in the arts? What about people who work in hospitality? In those places where we're now being told you can't have large gatherings anymore, there are many, many people whose livelihood depends on there being large gatherings, people who are performers, people who work behind the bars, people who work in cafes. This work is now drying up, and what are those people meant to do? And to say, well, look, in some instances, you can just fall back on New Start or youth allowance is not enough, because not only will that not meet the obligations that you have, but if you're working on youth allowance, you're on youth allowance and you're topping up your youth allowance with a couple of shifts doing casual work, then it's no comfort to say, oh, we'll just fall back on youth allowance. You're going to find yourself behind. So we need to look after people who are working in the arts, in hospitality, in tourism, in all those sectors that are doing it hard. And that also means a stimulus package, not just for big businesses, but a stimulus package for the not-for-profit sector, a stimulus package for the arts sector, a stimulus package for people in hospitality as well. A job is a job is a job, and we shouldn't be prioritising some jobs over others and saying that only some jobs are worthy of government support while everyone else gets thrown to the wolves. So as we return to Parliament next week, know this. If you're one of the people that the government is leaving behind, if you're working in one of those sectors that the government is leaving behind, we will fight hard for you when Parliament resumes, to make sure the government takes every one of us into account, and that no sector is left behind, that no person is left behind, as we deal with one of the biggest crises of our generation. And the last thing that I want to say is this. When you look at this government, they do not have a very good track record of listening to independent advice and science and acting according to it. This is the Prime Minister who brought in lumps of coal into Parliament despite the climate science telling us we're in an emergency. This is the government that got advice about which sports clubs needed grants and then just totally ignored it for basic electoral purposes. So this government does not have a good track record when it comes to listening to the independent advice. They also don't have a good track record when it comes to protecting public health. Now, we are really, really lucky in Australia to have a gold-class, world-class public health system. I've had to take my kids into emergency a couple of times, and can I say, it's not a nice feeling, but you come out of it thinking, thank goodness I don't live in America where I would have had to have taken out something the size of a small mortgage to have my kids or myself looked after. We are very, very lucky to have a really good public health system, but the one thing we know is that this government has attacked it, cut funding from it, tried to charge more for us to go and see the doctor, attacked Medicare, and that makes me worried that this government is not doing enough to prepare our world-class public health system for the crisis that is looming and that is going to come soon. We need to at least double the number of beds in intensive care if we are to avoid the number of deaths from coronavirus getting even higher. You just have to look at other countries around the world to see what is coming for us, and we need to start preparing now. I want the government to explain what is the plan to double the number of intensive care beds that are available. That will make the difference as to whether people live or die. And in the past, the government has attacked our public health system at every opportunity, and now they need to step up and tell us what plan they are putting in place to double the number of intensive care beds that are going to be available for all of us who are going to need it. We hope that we can flatten the curve. And that has got to be the priority for all of us at the moment. Do everything we can so that there is not a spike in demand on our healthcare system. Flatten the curve. Listen to the measures about social distancing, because they are important, and put them into practice. Listen to the measures about something as simple as washing your hands while singing Happy Birthday twice, or you can make it through most of Frozen up to the chorus. My daughters have told me that that counts for 20 seconds as well. You can do these things, and you must do these things, because that is what's going to help stop the spread. And please listen to the advice about talking to people, especially your older parents, about how serious this is, and older relatives you've got. So please do all of that and contribute to flattening the curve. And our job is to push the government to say, even with a flattened curve, we know we're going to have a demand on our health system. You've got to be ready for it. So over the next little while, just know and remind yourself that as we feel anxious and we scroll through our social media feeds and our news feeds and see the toll ticking up of the number of people who've been infected, and every few seconds there's a report of some other development and a new travel ban and someone else who's been hit by this virus. No, as all of that is happening, we're all reading that and we're all feeling the same, but we're all in this together. This is going to be one of those moments as a society where we will judge ourselves and we can pat ourselves on the back, hopefully at the end of it, knowing that we didn't leave anyone behind, that we pulled people through who needed assistance, and we made sure everyone was looked after. Part of my job is to make sure the government steps up to the plate and doesn't leave people behind. Part of our job collectively is to look after each other, wash our hands, keep the social distance from each other that we're being asked to, but above all, be kind. This is a time where it's going to be tough for everyone. It ain't so easy to have several people stuck in a house if you're having to stay there for long periods of time, and if you're not sending your kids off to school. I get that. This is a time to be kind. Let's all be kind to each other, because we're all in this together. Thank you. Bye.